Hello everyone, welcome back to this week's STEMcast podcast. Today we are joined by Andre from Year 10, who's going to join us to talk about probability versus possibility. So when I first heard about this topic, I actually had some kind of different ideas relating to it. First I thought about it from a STEM perspective, but then I also thought about it from a real life perspective and how some things that seem nearly impossible sometimes end up happening. So what were your thoughts on this topic, Andre?
Well, to be honest, I picked this topic because it interests me. Because if we think about it, many people have a misconception of what is probability compared to possibility. And there's many examples of this, where this can be evident in between people while asking for situations or outcomes.
Yeah, I think possibility is kind of a difficult thing to wrap your head around because it's not just either impossible or certain to happen. There is always an in-between of there is a likelihood of it happening, but you're not certain and it's not impossible. So I think the kind of conflict in the definition of it is also something good to discuss.
Yes, and in fact, many people actually get it confused because they say, what is the probability of that? Well, if you do count the probability, you have to count in the factors. Rather than possibility, it's just counting the outcomes. Such as, right now, as we're filming, a meteor could fall on me. That is a possibility. But if we use probability to figure out that outcome, we'd have to consider the factors of the meteor location, like what are the probability of a meteor actually falling on me, and it would be like 99.9 to 0.001. Rather, if we use possibility, it would be a 1-to-1 possibility.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think possibility doesn't necessarily align a value to it, where probability gives you a percentage of it happening. But I think also probability, you can never be sure of that probability is correct when considering real life factors, because there are so many things that could happen. Like, you could literally drop dead before the meteor comes. I'm just saying there are so many different factors that you need to consider when considering probability. So especially in real life scenarios, it's almost impossible for you to come up with an exact probability of being sure with it.
Yes, it is really hard for us to wrap our minds around it, because not only that, but the factors are never always changing. Right now I could be breathing, the other second I could be not, before the meteor hits, as you just said. Right now the time is, I don't know, 12:08, and 1 minute is gonna be 12:09. Things change per minute. The factors change so quickly that it's really, really hard for it to happen at a certain time as it would for probability.
I think probability is also something that we can apply to different fields, like gaming, for example, like gambling, which is illegal in this country, obviously, but it's something that we need to consider. Finance and decision making. So should I invest in this? There's always the probability that you will get a positive investment or a negative investment. And I think it's so interesting that it can be applied to so many different fields and aspects of our life, where it's something that we need to consider.
Yes, in fact, since we actually had a topic on probability in math, it's involved in many jobs around the world. As you said, there's involvement in the stock market, where you have to know if it goes up or down, the prices, and for that you have to conclude the probability, not possibility, the probability, because probability is using the factors. So what factors affect the stock price? Also, other jobs that can use probability is astronomers use probability to see the probability of a shooting star or a meteorite. They use probability. It's really impressive if you really think about it in depth, how much of people use probability and possibility to advance their lives, to make decisions every day. For example, if let's say I will have the option to pick from a pasta or a burger, I have to consider, obviously not personally I don't, but many health freaks do consider the possibility of, let's say, that increasing like a heart attack, and the possibility of death by the burger by increasing the cholesterol level, rather than the possibility being I die or I live, or the factor that the many possibilities and probabilities affect other probabilities. Such as an example, if I have the choice of going to a salad bar and going to McDonald's, the factors that I take in to affect that probability outcome is the pleasure and my hunger. Salad, I don't know about you, but salad doesn't really fill up my stomach. Therefore, I usually go to McDonald's, and I would, it also satisfies the pleasure of eating that fast food. Now that probability, that outcome would most likely become a factor of the probability of your health, such as if you're healthy or if you're not healthy. That's a factor. That probability outcome will act as a factor in that probability. So probabilities affect other probabilities, and it's really, really interesting to think about that.
Yeah, I agree. And I think there are other instances of things that we never thought would happen that actually did end up occurring. For example, the COVID-19 pandemic. If you would have asked anyone at the time, do you think something would happen? Most likely they would have said no, because it was pretty much came out of the blue, and it affected so much planning that went into it as well, because it was such a huge factor in people's lives. They couldn't go out of their homes. So any plans that people had pre-COVID were completely altered and changed for after COVID.
Yeah, exactly. And if you consider the factor of that happening, such as that, if you go back to 2019 and you ask the majority of people, do you think that a pandemic will happen that will and have the incredibly big effect that COVID did with our technology, with our medicine, with our standards of living, they would have rightfully said no. Yet the tiny probability factor of it happening yet occurred. Therefore, it is really interesting that we do not think of the world as a possibility rather than a probability, but it can still happen. So we have to take both things into consideration, not just one. Therefore, it is really important that we do that.
Yeah, I completely agree. I also think that in Humble Pie, a book I was reading, it said that, I think in one of the bits, I read it such a long time ago, so I barely remember it, but it said that there was a picture, I think I mentioned this on the podcast before, but there was a picture of a girl going to Disneyland, right? And in the background, there was a boy, like, behind her. And then later on, they ended up getting married, and they didn't even know each other at the time, which I find so crazy. And I think that the probability of that actually happening is so low. But, like, the same thing with, like, winning the lottery, right? If winning the lottery, the probability of that happening is super low, but the possibility of that happening is certain, because someone is going to win the lottery. Like, they don't go on the news and say, oh my god, someone won the lottery again, like, because the probability of you getting it is super low, but the probability of someone getting it is pretty much certain, because that's why they have the lottery.
Yeah. In fact, if you about the lottery thing, either you win it or you don't win it. That's a possibility. Yes, there's a possibility you do. Yes, there's a possibility you don't. Probability will take into factors such as the amount of people that are doing it, and how much in reality, like, you know,
how many tickets you spend,
how many tickets you buy, how much money you spend. That's really the difference. And by the way, yeah, I've seen an example of the girl in Disneyland that in the background there's a photo, there was the boyfriend. Yeah, I saw that on TikTok actually. Yeah, it's really interesting to think about, because you would think that in that moment the probability of them meeting is yet certain, because there are two kids in Disneyland, and they're like, the probability of them meeting there rather than 20 years later or something like that and marrying is a lot bigger than that.
Yeah, and the thing is, she was showing her boyfriend pictures of her when she was younger, and he was like, oh my god, zoom in a bit, that's me. Like, that's just crazy to think about. But when we take into consideration that there are 8 billion people plus on this earth, it's likely to happen at some point, and you're pretty much certain to get a few instances of this at some point. So I think, do you have any final thoughts on this?
No, I think all my final thoughts have been said.
Yeah, so just to finish it off, I think one thing to keep in mind is that even if the probability of achieving what you want is super low, I think it's important that you take hold of the possibility that it's still possible, and just keep into consideration all the different factors that we have discussed. So thank you so much for watching. Thank you, Andre, for coming on.
My pleasure.
Thank you, and see you all next time.